Right, let's stay with Manchester United, fresh from winning that League Cup at Wembley. There is an update on the Glazers' plans to sell the club. Our senior reporter, Melissa Reddy, there she is, joins us here in the studio. Very good morning to you, Melissa. Right, what can you tell us?
So I was at Wembley and Abraham Glazer was there as well, and seeing him there with Sir Alex Ferguson in the tunnel with Erik ten Hag, he was in the dressing room for the celebrations as well post-match. There was a feeling at the ground of, is this a man who looks like he's about to sell Manchester United? Now, Abraham and Joel Glazer, they've always been different to the rest of the family. Their siblings want to sell the club. They haven't really wanted to cede control of United, and they need to be convinced of doing that. Now, this strategic review they've had to invite bidders and look at investment, they were expecting a greater uptake. We know there's only 2 public bidders, and neither of them have gotten close to the £6 billion valuation Manchester United's owners want. They feel that the club, when you look at the potential for commercial growth, how they factor in emerging markets, and just what a massive sporting asset this is, it doesn't matter how much debt the club has. It doesn't matter how much the infrastructure is going to cost. It doesn't matter how much in transfer fees they own. The Glazers believe that you should be, puffing your chest out to own Manchester United, and if you want to take it from them, you've got to put the money down. So at the moment, it seems like they're very, very reluctant to part with the club, especially if they don't get anywhere close to their valuation. Now, some of the things we need to remember is that just recently, Abraham Glazer said it's not necessarily a sale. So, very much looking at how they can mine investment in different kind of ways. We need to remember that in October, Jim Ratcliffe himself said the Glazers aren't looking to sell. And when you look at the statement they put out in November about the strategic review, it even says there that nothing might happen, nothing might come from this. It's just an exploration process. What's also affecting them is the fact that I think they misread the market. So Fenway Sports Group, Liverpool's owners, also had the same thing. They looked at Chelsea, whose sale was completely different. There were sanctions imposed. It needed to be a quick-fire sale. The scale of interest in Chelsea told Manchester United and Liverpool's owners that there'd be even greater interest because those are 2 bigger clubs. That hasn't really been the case. And John Henry from FSG has said Liverpool are not for sale now. So there's a lot of things bubbling under that show that we might be getting too excited about a Manchester United takeover, and a lot needs to happen to convince, especially Abraham, to let go of the club.
So Abraham showing his affection for Manchester United the weekend. I think it's fair to say that a group of supporters at Wembley showed their lack of affection towards Abraham Glazer. That. So how do you think this news might go down with the club's supporters?
The support base have been consistent, quite authoritative and very strong in making their position clear. We want the Glazers out. And that was the case at Wembley as well. It was the most consistent chant you heard. Even amid the jubilation, the celebrations, players lifting the trophy in front of the fans, they were making their position against the club ownership clear. And I think we need to state as well that all the progress that United have made have been in spite of the Glazers and their leveraged buyout.
OK, let's get more on this, shall we? How about this? We can speak to the sports lawyer, Ben Pepe. OK, we also hear about the shares perhaps dipping as well. So what are the factors that may be influencing their thinking here?
I think there's 2 factors on either side of this debate as to whether the Glazers are going to sell. And the first of those really is aligned to the uptick in United's form. Erik ten Hag, they just won their first trophy at the weekend. And there's this notion in the public domain now that because United, and per kind of Pep Guardiola's comments in his in his earlier press conference, United are in a rich vein of form. The success potentially is coming back. And actually, the Glazers may now think, well, why do we need to sell? We know that United's valuation is going to increase as more success comes through the new manager, through signing new players. And actually, that may have influenced their decision even during the process since it first started. The other side and the flip side to that is actually, as United look to be on the dawn of a potentially new horizon, does that mean that it's a more attractive investment asset? And does that mean that actually the valuation of the club has suddenly gone up significantly since November, since the club was put up for sale, or I suppose, alternative investment strategies were going to be explored? So there's that very interesting timing debate around market factors and what's going on within the economy as to where United sits, both from a valuation perspective as a football asset, but then in terms of the wider market and its existence on the New York Public Stock Exchange, versus actually what's happening on the pitch, and whether that's going to influence the Glazers to sell because actually they can get the highest valuation that they would have probably over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, or actually there's a deeper involvement there that means that they want to see out a new era of success, as they did in the late early 2000s and into the 2010s.
You speak there about the valuation the Glazers are looking at and how it could have been affected over the last few months. I've been told they're quite underwhelmed, actually, by the level of interest in United. We know there were only 2 public bidders. What have you made from that? Can you understand why they're feeling the way they are?
Yes and no. I think the reality is that for any shrewd investor looking at Manchester United as a pure investment asset, the valuation that the Glazers have set onto the club it's punchy. It's a high valuation. It's going to be what they would want to be the most expensive sports club acquisition of all time, and that's across any sport, including in the NFL and the NBA. So there's a lot going on in the world from market economics perspective that means that actually the valuation that the Glazers have put on the club from a financial perspective may actually not make much sense to a shrewd investor. And I think the interesting thing about the parties interested in Manchester United is that you've got obviously Sheikh Jasim, which is, as we know, linked to Qatar and significant wealth. We've got Sir Jim Ratcliffe, obviously the richest man in Britain. He runs one of the most successful companies within the country. These are people that are shrewd investors, and they will look at this obviously as a sporting asset. They will look at Manchester United. They will look at the brand. They will look at the global powerhouse that it is as an institution. But the reality is that these investors aren't going to overpay, and whether that means that the Glazers sell up or they don't, you are not going to have an ownership group that understands what a football club should cost with the advisors that they've got and the people assessing the deal. They're not going to overpay for this. They might overpay in terms of what the market believes, per the Financial Times report of the club only being valued in kind of around 1.3 billion. We know that's not going to happen. But the reality is that there is only a ballpark within which the club will sell, and it's certainly not going to go for a significant amount over what these prospective bidders are willing to pay.
So, Ren, what is this? Is this an impasse? Is this brinkmanship? And whichever one it is, what is the next stage in the process then?
The Glazers have been very clear since they first started this process that they're exploring investment alternatives. They're exploring different strategies, and in any merger and acquisition, in any big deal with this value size attributed to it, there's always going to be significant negotiation around valuations, different investment alternatives being explored, and we have those all on the table. We have a full majority buyout, we have a 69% investment that's been proposed, and we have a financing aligned to a potential infrastructure into the club. I think the Glazers want everything on the table. They apparently, according to reports, were deliberately vague in their initial kind of process that they undertook, aligned to the bidders coming in and putting their own valuation on the club prior to getting into due diligence and into the data rooms where the prospective bidders' advisors can really kind of attribute a very specific valuation aligned to a whole host of information aligned to the club. So I think the Glazers are doing exactly what they set out to do. They have a process in place. They have multiple offers on the table that are all different. They all offer something new to them. What I think would be really interesting to see is that if they are going to go down the latter route of essentially having investment into the club, but they retain majority ownership, those groups, whether it be Elliott, whether it be Oak Tree, whoever it might be, the reality is for the size of investment, even though it will be minority that they want to make, they will still then be able to dictate a certain amount within the structure of the club, where the club moves forward, where that investment needs to go into the new stadium, training ground, players. So I think the deliberation for the Glazers from that perspective is, if they're going to take minority investment, are they happy to cede a bit of control, or do they want to just get rid of the club and then that's kind of job done? So whether they can essentially move towards a structure where they have people at the top table with them, or they get rid, I think they're exploring it. And I don't think they're in any particular rush, but I think from a football side, United and Erik ten Hag will want this done by the start of the summer transfer window, so the club can continue to move forward.
Ben, just explain to me, because I'm confused, which is a common theme in my life. But Chelsea was a fire sale, wasn't it? But it went for the sort of money that maybe the Glazers are wanting. Why are the bids lower for Manchester? I think even the most diehard Chelsea fan would concede that Manchester United are globally a bigger club than Chelsea. So why are we seeing this difference, not only at Manchester United, but also, as Melissa was mentioning, at Liverpool as well? Why hasn't it attracted what they'd hoped it would attract?
So I think there's a few reasons. As you say, Chelsea was a quicker sale. It had to be a quicker sale because of what was happening at the time with regards to Russia and Ukraine, and with regards to the sanctions placed on Mr. Abramovich. But just because there's a significant amount of interest declared doesn't mean that those are all prospective bidders that could then go and acquire the club. I think there was over 100 registered parties that registered their interest in Chelsea. And actually, when it came down to signing non-disclosure agreements and I suppose putting a serious foot forward, there was close to 10. With Manchester United, I think that there's a number of factors at play. As I alluded to earlier, the notion that this is going to be the most expensive sporting franchise sale of all time to date means that that's only going to be possible for a certain amount of ownership groups. In the UK, there's very few people that are able to do that. The fact that it is Britain's richest man that has put a bid forward showcases that. In the US, as we know, there's been a number, I think it's close to half, if not half, of Premier League football clubs now have minority and majority investment from US ownership groups. So there's already a huge presence within UK, European and world football from ownership groups across the world. We've obviously seen Newcastle and links to the Public Investment Fund in Saudi Arabia, Manchester City and Abu Dhabi. So the reality is that whilst this is obviously a hugely attractive sporting institution, sporting asset, there are very few parties across the world that actually can have the money to go out and buy Manchester United. So I think that will dictate the amount of interested parties, number one. And I think number two, it's not just the valuation on the club, it's actually the required spend. United are in a very different position to, say, Liverpool, and more akin to the Chelsea sale, whereby there will be a price for the club and then there's a significant infrastructure commitment that's required. And you're talking close to the tune of £2 billion. So that's the stadium redevelopment, that's the training ground, that's writing off the debt, that's the infrastructure commitment to the playing squad as well. So this is where we're talking about a significant amount of money here. And the reality is that based on ownership groups already having presence within sporting institutions, football clubs across the world, that limits them out of the equation, because we know what the rules are with regards to multi-club ownership and the same ownership group having different stakes in different clubs competing in European competition. So the reality is that there's not all that much left. And then when you get into banks, institutions, whilst the sporting elements are important, the reality is it's the finances. And do the finances stack up for a football club acquisition to the tune of what the Glazers believe Manchester United to be worth? Debatable.
Fascinating. Ben, thank you very much indeed. And Melissa, too, thank you very much indeed.